Okay, welcome back for episode 2. So last episode, we talked about vibe coding, and today we want to dig into a little bit deeper. I used to spend like 3 hours of dorm duty on a Friday night making like what I would call dominoes or question and answer card sorts. It takes a lot of refining, and now I do it in seconds with Splycr, which is one of my builds. But before we get into that story, this week in educational AI, there was a big one. So 2 cities went in completely opposite directions on AI in schools. And the OECD just dropped a research that explains exactly why tools like Splycr exist. So we'll connect all of it. Let's go. Over to Shane.
Yeah, it was actually really interesting to read about the tale of 2 cities, I guess you could say, because you had New York City that restricted the AI rollouts because they wanted to really make sure that the products and the way that the information is being distributed and used is appropriate, whereas Boston kind of is going in another direction where they're saying, hey, we see this as the future. Our kids need to be prepared, and we want to make sure that we are making this a graduation requirement to ensure that our students are able to graduate and feel like they have the skills necessary to show up in the real world with some AI level skills. And so I think it's interesting just the way that this conversation is unfolding in education, because it just creates this confusion and kind of a little bit of uncertainty because we don't really know how to use it, how to best implement it for best practice for our students and their outcomes. And we know that it will probably be important. But yeah, just the concerns about privacy, where the data goes, how we're using the information that's being shared in it, how is it affecting students' learning outcomes and their ability to perform? Is it a crutch? Is it not? And so it's interesting to see how those 2 cities are kind of approaching it a little differently. I mean, obviously we have our kind of take on that. And I do think the thing that I've been thinking about a lot in terms of this reality the last probably couple weeks is just thinking about how discernment is going to be super, super important for educators and students, of just like, when do I need to use AI? When is it best to have a human interaction? What kind of questions are important to be asking and talking to AI about versus not? So being able to channel and foster that critical thinking skills to be able to discern an idea is worth AI use or not. I
just jump in there and say, like, yeah, I think that most people are very reactionary. Like last year, I gave a short presentation to a group of teachers about how I was using AI in the classroom. I would say I was a first mover in that sense. I embraced it fully. I was like, wow, I can speed run things here. I can create one of the things I love doing is taking a biological process, creating a poem, and then asking it to add a few mistakes in, like lace a few mistakes. I'm not very good at English language when I was at school. Like it's the class that I was failing. And when I became a teacher in England, you have to take an English test. I failed it twice. 3rd time I studied and I just scraped through. I nearly failed my whole PGC based on that interesting anecdote. But so my poetry skills are off. I ask it to like weave in a little mistake here and there, and we can start the lesson as like a settler, like, okay, here's the protein synthesis, spot the mistake. So I gave a presentation and I told the teachers how I had scaffolded AI to help my students get extra feedback on their internal assessment. I'm like, they're going to ask AI, so why not give them some scaffolding? Because if you just put in, help me with this or read this, it will rewrite the whole thing. And you can't unread that. You're going to read it. You're going to see it's better than what you can write. And you're just going to copy and paste it. Like that's just what you're going to want to do. And I tell them, how did I learn to write scientifically? It was paraphrasing other authors from looking at scientific journals. And this is like that on steroids. And you want to still keep your own voice. And I, like, even in LinkedIn, I went I think like it's such AI slop there. You can instantly see someone's copied and pasted from AI just by the formatting. Like, why haven't you even reformatted the spacing here? And why haven't you removed that, like, whatever that long line
Here's
is?
the thing.
So I don't read it. And when I get an
Yeah.
email from like can I say my boss on here? Like one of my bosses sends an email and it's AI generated, and I'm like, okay, you've chucked your notes in and it's giving me an email. It looks great, but I kind of find it hard to engage with it because I know AI has written it. So
Yeah.
my students will gonna inevitably chuck their internal assessments into AI and get feedback. And I was like, okay, they need some rails. And I gave a presentation about this. And we did this in like September of 2024, before the IB had even made a stance on it. And then, of course, I give this presentation after we've just had the week before the talk about how that counts as a second iteration of feedback, and that is not allowed. So I then, of course, get an email from one of my other bosses, the IB coordinator, rightly so, because he wanted to check what I actually meant and what had happened. And I was like, okay, like we did this in September, and the IB didn't change their stance until March. So like it was a gray area at the time. But from my perspective, you can't just come out of a stance and say, okay, you can't use AI, so it's like the freaking inverse of it. It gets confusing, a tongue twister. You can't use AI to read your internal assessment, your IA. Like, that's ridiculous. What the IB should be doing as a reaction, instead of just putting the brakes on, is saying, we have made a LLM that has got the guardrails to give quality feedback to students. I mean, I can make one of those if you give me an afternoon. I would make one if like it was within their guidelines, but they could do that. They're building an agent at the moment, it said in a recent update, but it doesn't take that long, like, to actually put some guardrails in place that gives you some basic MVP, minimum viable product, that says, here is my science IA, here's some feedback. And there's a few competitors out there at the moment, like Classify, that have done that. Of course, it's not really allowed, but it's a great area. Once again, I'm not really allowed to read their work more than once officially. But come on, who can go and write a perfect internal assessment with one set of feedback from their teacher? And how is that fair when some other kid might afford a tutor that then sits down with them for 20 hours? So it all feels very reactionary, but of course, it's just a reflection of this is hugely powerful and we don't know where it's going.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's the thing too, right? Is I think the more that we can discern how to use it and when to use it and what to look for, and cultivate that skill, the more that we can effectively implement the tools. Because the reality is that like it is already smarter than most people, right? Even PhD levels like are using it and effectively using it to leverage their knowledge in a more quicker recall capacity. And so it's just like, I know doctors that are using it and things like that, not because they're like diagnosing their patients with it, but because they're using it as a tool to reference and help them extract what they need more effectively, right?
My mate that's a dentist, very successful dentist, was like, yeah, I'm like using it to share the x-rays and get a second opinion. But the difference is, he understands enough to know if that opinion is valid. He understands whether or not he needs to call another human being. But it's that piece that's difficult at the moment in education, to know, like, at what point, like, you need to memorize. Like, I always say to my kids, that like, why do I have to memorize all this stuff in biology? And I'm like, well, how can you have an original idea or ask a question if you know nothing? You need to know facts still. It doesn't remove that. AI doesn't remove the need to know facts. It might remove the need to know explicitly how to write in JavaScript, but you still need to understand the architecture of the code work it's doing. But maybe you could get away with, it's still good to understand it, but you could get away with that it removes that heavy lifting part. So as long as you have that understanding, it removes the heavy lifting.
Right. Well, and that's where it's super cool with tools like Notebook LM or other things where you can reference just the materials that the teachers are wanting. So you're not like wanting you to see. So you're not using things that are essentially just kind of pulling it out of thin air. But that's, I mean, honestly, how we got into and figured out how to vibe code the kind of apps and things that we've been building, is just by asking great questions and just being like, tell me why you did this. How does this work? Like, I don't really like how this looks. How can we improve it to do this? Or this functionality is glitching over here. So I think it's just that discernment process is like asking high level questions, being able to be super clear about what you want, and developing that in a way that kind of we work with the AI and the capabilities that it has versus just kind of like telling it to think for you. Obviously, that's a way bigger problem, and we're not going to be able to solve that today. But it's definitely part of that philosophical question that is worth exploring and digging into, because it's going to not go away anytime soon.
When you mention questions, I should give M.A. Skidmore a shout out, who tagged us in a post this week, because her questions were so cool and I loved them. She was like experimenting with vibe coding. We connected in a PD this week, something called Sandcastle, which is set up by a guy called Paul Magnuson we're following, who's really pushes and supports like teacher advocacy. But like the idea, her questions were, no, that question would make a tired teacher click away. Like these were her points. This needs to feel like relief, not another task. That sounds like a consultant wrote it from a hotel lobby. And, you know, and she quickly came to the realization that it's about coaching. And you're like coaching the AI to get you where you want to be. And we mentioned Splycr earlier, and I feel like I could segue into that. You know,
well, I think before you do that, I think what is interesting to think about is the other article that we were reading and prepared for preparation for this episode was that the OECD released a kind of a research, and it's the Digital Education Outlook for 2026. And they essentially said generic AI tools don't produce real learning gains. And the stat was that they mentioned was that students who used generic AI chatbots improved task performance, but scored 17% worse on independent exams when AI was removed. And what their conclusion was is that these generic tools, where you're just asking like ChatGPT in a window, can maybe help you with the initial task, but don't help you to produce stronger outcomes when those kind of chatbots are removed. But they were kind of emphasizing and leaning into the fact that we need to build more custom tools that tailor the learning for students in a more refined and curated way, which kind of it goes into what you're doing with Splycr perfectly. Because it was kind of fun to read that, because it was like that's exactly the thesis behind what we have been talking about and what we think is going to happen and change in the world of education and implementing the use of AI. And so it kind of was the exact framework kind of that validated this whole idea of why we got started. So yeah, tell us a little bit about Splycr. What's up with that?
This is Splycr, and it's inspired by Kahoot. So something I do in my class to build rapport is we have like what started as a Kahoot league that then became an arbitrary league. So we just have a league, and it pivoted from a Kahoot league because one person would always dominate it. And the kids found they enjoy Kahoot, but they don't enjoy the same person always winning. So I was like, how can I level the playing field? There's a game like there's Blooket. Blooket does that nicely with one where you steal gold. But I was like, I have an idea for like a team game where the students are a team taking on a boss, and then they get scores based on their accuracy. So that's when Splycr was born, and it's not something I've pushed very much yet. And it's something I used a lot in class, and it's something that I've been wanting to put out there. But it's become like a one-stop shop for formative assessment as well. So the idea just continually evolved, and it's something that I built with my class, with their feedback. And you can see like, you know, we've got a Gen Z slang card set here. I just make one quickly. And the idea is you can drop in an image. I can give a unit here. So maybe I do a 1.1 water, which is the first one in IB Bio. I can select a curriculum. So there's loads of curriculums on here. There's loads of subjects, loads of curriculums. There's the grade level. I can offer a description which merely goes to anyone viewing it in the public library, and I can put an emphasis. And I can ask for like emphasis on key terms, or I could talk about calculations. Any information I give here is some adding to the rails that the AI already has. And then I can click to share in a public library, generate a set of cards, and I need to give it the topic. Do it the first thing, and then I can choose the amount as well. And what's nice here is I made it so it's multilingual. I could do IB Bio in French, or IB Bio in Spanish, or IB Bio in German. I can use it as a language teacher. I could have the English to French or the English to Spanish. I should put the inverse of that in actually as well, of course. And then the output's different. I can have extended answers, fill the gap, one word. Because the main point for me with Kahoot was the cards that are publicly available are not that good. I don't want to pay for a premium subscription. I don't have the time to write them myself. And it just takes a lot of time. I could add the keyword bank in. And what I've found, I spent a long time writing the Rails to guide the AI that I've plugged into this. And what I've found is that the cards come out really good and I need to do minimal editing. So here's the 10 that it produced. Polar molecule with high specific heat capacity, essential for life. And it's a great starting point. So I just add these 10 questions. And then as a teacher, it auto saves. And then as a teacher, what's really nice, can't see that corner. So I click save set, but it's already auto saved. When I go to look at this and download, I can download as multiple different things. So a multiple choice test, a word search, a crossword, like bingo and the dominoes. So the dominoes, this is the pain point I said in the beginning. I love dominoes. I was inspired by this book called Friday Afternoon Biology. And the guy has loads of domino sets in there for A-level biology. And I would make them myself. And I would, you can see there's a tiny mistake here. It's actually a mistake in the other thing there. But, you know, the students love finding the bugs as well. Is what they are naturally assume there's going to be a million bugs. I mean, like what software do you subscribe to that doesn't have a tiny bug here or there? I'm now using Question Bank built by the IB.
I mean, that's pretty cool. You just created all of that literally in the last minute. That's pretty cool. Like even with the bug, like that's amazing.
Well, I said the bug is just changing one letter. It's put deg instead of the little degree sign. But that's like one. It's one quick change. It doesn't have.
Oh, it's 4 degrees Celsius. Oh, okay, yeah, that's what it's supposed to mean. Deg.
Yeah. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, but this would have taken me freaking hours before I have to write out a document. I have to cut and paste it in. So totally. I'm shaving hours off something that I'm going to do, and I can just print this off and use it in class.
Which, I mean, I'm sure there's, I don't know, some teachers that enjoy that creative process of building those things. And I think you kind of would agree with that. You did too. But there's something really nice about being able to kind of generate these cool tools quickly and then also frees you up to actually do the work that's important to you, right? Like whether it be, you know, having more time with your family or, you know, creating, you know, more one-on-one conversations with students about how they can improve on things and understand your material. So that's really great.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple things, isn't it? Freeing someone's mental load in the evening so they're not spending ages creating a resource, or being able to then be, you know, more alert and have those one-to-one conversations and spend longer grading. So it's just about trying to remove some pain points. And then I've got a whole bunch of different games. And this is the fun bit, was like creating games that leveled the playing field for students. So they have learning at the forefront of the pedagogy rather than winning. So like Kaboom is my favorite. It's like a pass the bomb. So everyone's answering the same questions in real time. Everyone gets different questions. And then there's a bomb being randomly thrown around the room that explodes and removes someone's points. Not all of them, just some of them. You know, and I've really enjoyed like that aspect of it. And the kids come up with some games, and you know, for me, like what vibe coding, what's special about it is that iterative process with my students and helping build that agency and giving them some ownership over what we're doing in class. And it's just another area. And I think like, so I read this article this week about the AI slop of EdTech products. And I was like, yeah, there's a lot being produced. But my friend that pointed it out to me, this article, was when we were talking about something. I was like, I'm not suggesting that everyone builds a million different apps.
Yeah.
What I'm suggesting is maybe everyone has that 1 or 2 pain points or 1 or 2 tools that they wish they had that either they couldn't afford or just doesn't exist that they can now build themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just about getting started. And some content that we need to produce is some simple how-tos, like the very basic. Because I've realized as well from conversations this week, you and I are so deep in this rabbit hole, and we kind of assume everyone else is a bit too. My wife was using Framly yesterday, my revision app, and I was like, "Yeah, you just upload a CSV file." She's like, "What is a CSV file?" And I was like, "Everyone knows what a CSV file is. Like, that's just standard technology knowledge." And so, the conversation went well from there, as you can imagine. But today she did message me and she said, "You'd be proud of me. I just made a CSV file and uploaded it." And
let's go.
Yeah. So,
well, and I think that that's super true. Like maybe just breaking it down and simplifying it and making it really understandable. Well, and I think what's cool, and I think that's exactly what we're trying to build with Free Period, is a place where teachers can go. They can put their projects, those pain points that they have, because there might be a pain point that you have that you're dealing with in your classroom that you solve with a cool app, or just even a HTML formatted lesson plan, and that like solves something really helpful for you, and you can share that with the world, and maybe somebody else can find a value to that, or realize that that problem is something they had too, because they didn't realize they had that problem, and you can
or
kind of
even just use it as a starting point that they can tweak to then make it their own and more suitable for their learners. Like that's when I say I think vibe coding is the new lesson planning. It's like I take someone's lesson plan and I tweak it to fit my teaching style. But now we can take someone's EdTech tool and then tweak it so that it now fits their teaching style or their learners. So when I say, oh, it's the ultimate tool for UDL, of course, it's not our only tool, but it's a really great tool that I think is going to become more and more prevalent in everyone's classroom.
Yeah, for sure. That's going to be huge. So the, I mean, it's fun to see, how your students are responding to this as well, and how they're showing up and looking for ways that they can debug it. And I imagine in the future, they're probably just going to be like, oh yeah, we just go to Splycr, or we just go to Cramly, and they don't even think twice about it. It's just a thing that they do. So
that's the dream. I mean, what I want to add to Splycr is a solo player campaign mode where a kid can select the questions that they want, and then so it becomes like a bit of a gamified revision tool.
totally.
But yeah, before we close out, I think it's just interesting to add a little bit of physics where I don't think you sounded too squeaky this week,
Oh yeah, thank you, appreciate it.
When I watched this back last week I was like,
couldn't
oh my
stop
God,
hearing the mousy voice of Shane.
No, and I couldn't stop hearing Danny Dyer, and he's like a great British actor, like he's a true classic icon, but equally he's a proper London geezer, and I was like, do I really sound like that? Like I kind of thought I'd polished my rough edges, but the reason why
all right, slow down.
The reason why you think you've got this like dulcet tone when actually it's squeaky is because it's about bone conduction, and when you produce this sound, you're hearing the conduction through your jaw and some compression of sound waves, but primarily that, and the sound waves bouncing off the wall, like you'll sound different in different rooms, but ultimately we hear something quite different. It's like those conduction headphones, the ones that work with bone conduction, and you're hearing that conduction through your jaw. So unfortunately, I still sound like a London geezer, and you still sound like a squeaky teenager.
I mean, I guess that's a good thing, right?
Forever young.
Age well. Well, some of the things I think that we'll close out with is, if you're a teacher who builds and you're wanting to start, you've come to the right place. This is where we're going to be talking about all things AI and education, and how you can start to kind of start teaching in the 21st century. And if you want to come and hang out, we're not live yet, but we'll be live soon, is at freeperiod.ai. You can sign up for the wait list. And we're going to hopefully be dropping that soon, just to kind of create a free space for us to talk and share our ideas, and, not be posting AI slop on LinkedIn all the time. So,
yeah. They're still doing that. No, I handwrite all my posts now.
There you go.
I had a spell, and actually I had a mate message me. He's like, "Man, you've been off your game this week." He's like, "That's definitely AI slop." It was like 6 months ago, and I was like, "You know what? Like, actually, you got to keep your personality in what you're writing." And another thing to mention before we sign off is, if you have any questions or anything you want us to discuss, please drop it in a comment.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, because it can give us ideas of things that we can talk about, things that we can explore. So, be great.
Yeah. All right, man.
All right. So for you 11 people out there, I'll see you next time.